Why does my necklace have your initial? The maid's toddler asked. The billionaire went pale. A locket doesn't lie. That's the phrase that kept echoing in my head while writing this one. Because sometimes the smallest object in a person's hand can unravel a lie that's been buried for years. Stick around, because by the end of the story, you're going to look at your own family differently. Hey friend, welcome back. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city and country in the comments. I read every single one of them. Tonight's story is about a little girl, a gold locket, and a secret that a powerful man buried so deep he thought it was gone forever. It's a story about love, guilt, and the kind of truth that refuses to stay hidden. I promise you, you will not see this ending coming. Let's begin. A 3-year-old doesn't know she's holding a bomb in her tiny fist. The Whitfield estate sat on 11 acres outside Austin, Texas, behind iron gates that opened only for people who mattered. Alexander Whitfield was 34 years old, and by every measure that the world used to define success, he had already won. He owned a tech empire that employed 12,000 people. His face had been on the cover of Forbes twice. He drove a car that cost more than most houses, and he lived in a house that looked like it belonged in a movie about kings. But Alex hadn't smiled, really smiled, the kind that reaches your eyes, in almost 4 years. His housekeeper, Maria Delgado, had worked for the Whitfield family for 8 months. She was quiet, careful, and always arrived before sunrise with her daughter's daycare bag already packed for the afternoon. Maria was 30 years old, with tired eyes that still held something soft underneath the exhaustion, like a candle that refused to fully go out no matter how much wind blew against it. Her daughter, Sophie, was 3. Curly hair, a gap-toothed smile, and a habit of following her mother into rooms she wasn't supposed to enter. On Tuesdays, when Maria couldn't find a sitter, she brought Sophie along, tucking her into a corner of the kitchen with a coloring book and strict instructions not to wander. Sophie never listened. That particular Tuesday afternoon, golden light spilled through the tall windows of the front hallway, catching on the marble floor like scattered coins. Alex had just walked in from a video call that left his jaw tight and his shoulders stiff. A call about numbers, about a merger that was falling apart, about a life that felt more like a spreadsheet every single day. He turned the corner toward the staircase and stopped. A small girl stood at the bottom of it, holding something up toward him with both hands, like an offering. Her eyes were wide, curious, fearless in the way only children can be around strangers. "Mister," she said, "why is your letter on my necklace?" Alex blinked. "What?" She stepped closer, and dangling from her tiny fingers was a thin gold chain, and at the end of it a small oval locket. Engraved across the front, in a script he would have recognized blindfolded, was a single letter. His stomach dropped before his brain even caught up to why. "Where?" he said slowly, crouching down to her eye level, his voice suddenly unsteady in a way that hadn't happened in years. "Did you get this?" "Mommy gave it to me," Sophie said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. She said it's mine forever. She said a very important person gave it to her a long, long time ago. Alex's hand trembled as he reached out, not to take the necklace, but just to touch it, to make sure it was real, to make sure his eyes weren't lying to him. Because he knew this locket. He knew the tiny scratch on the clasp. He knew the exact weight of it, because 11 years ago, he had placed it around someone else's neck with his own hands, in a parking lot behind a college diner, on the night before everything in his life changed. The night he lost the only woman he had ever truly loved. "Sophie." Maria's voice rang out from the kitchen doorway, panic sharpening every syllable. She rushed forward, scooping her daughter up before Alex could say another word, murmuring apologies, already backing toward the hallway exit. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Whitfield. She's not supposed to be out here, Maria." He said her name the way you'd say the name of someone who had died, and just walked back through your front door. She froze. For the first time in 8 months, she turned and looked at him directly. Not the polite, downward glance of an employee, but a full, unguarded look. And in that half-second, Alex saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen since he was 23 years old, standing in a parking lot at midnight, promising a girl named Maria Alvarez that no matter what happened, no matter what his family said, he would find a way back to her. He never did. "You're her," he whispered. "You're really her." Maria's grip tightened around her daughter, and her voice, when it finally came, cracked right down the middle. "I didn't want you to find out like this." Behind them, completely unaware of the storm she had just set loose, Sophie tugged at the locket around her neck and smiled up at the tall stranger with the shaking hands. "Do you know my mommy?" she asked. Alex opened his mouth. No sound came out, because the real question, the one clawing up his throat, the one he wasn't sure he was ready to hear the answer to, was not whether he knew Maria. It was how old exactly was this little girl standing in front of him, and what that number would mean for the rest of his life. Some silences last longer than years. Maria didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her daughter's bed in their small rented apartment across town, watching Sophie's chest rise and fall in the soft blue glow of a nightlight shaped like the moon. The locket sat on the nightstand, gleaming faintly, the letter A catching every stray beam of light like it wanted to be seen. 11 years. She had carried this secret for 11 years, and in the span of 30 seconds, a curious toddler had cracked it wide open in a marble hallway. Her mind drifted back, the way it always did on nights like this, to a small college town in Ohio, to a boy named Alexander who used to wait for her outside her night classes with 2 coffees, one black, one with too much sugar, because he could never remember which one was hers. He was going to inherit an empire someday, and everyone around them knew it, and everyone around them made sure Maria knew she didn't belong in that future. His mother, Eleanor Whitfield, had been the one to find her. Sharp suits, sharper words. She had come to Maria's dorm room on a rainy October evening with a folder full of numbers, the exact amount of money it would take to make Maria disappear from her son's life quietly, permanently, and without explanation. Maria had refused. Twice. The third time, Eleanor didn't bring money. She brought a threat instead, quiet, cold, precise. She told Maria that if she didn't leave willingly, she would make sure Alexander believed Maria had cheated on him, that she'd taken money from another man, that she was exactly the kind of girl his family had always warned him about. She would poison the well so completely that even if Maria stayed, there would be nothing left to hold on to. Maria had been 22, terrified, alone, and 3 weeks pregnant, though she hadn't known it yet. By the time she found out, she was already 3 states away, working double shifts at a diner in Texas, watching her stomach grow while reading old newspaper headlines about Alexander Whitfield's rapid rise in the business world, never once seeing a single message from him, never understanding that Eleanor had been intercepting every letter Maria tried to send. She named the baby Sophie. She gave her the locket Alex had given her the night before everything fell apart, the one engraved with his first initial, a promise he'd made half-jokingly, saying someday it would be a family heirloom. She never imagined her daughter would carry that promise straight back to his front door. Across town, in a bedroom far larger and far emptier, Alex sat awake too, staring at an old photograph he'd pulled from a box he hadn't opened in over a decade. Maria, 22, laughing at something off camera, her hand resting on his arm like it belonged there. He had spent 11 years believing the story his mother told him, that Maria had taken $40,000 and vanished without so much as a goodbye. He had spent 11 years turning that heartbreak into fuel, building an empire so large that no one could ever make him feel powerless again. And now a 3-year-old girl with his mother's eyes and Maria's stubborn chin had just shattered that story into 1,000 pieces. He picked up his phone. His fingers hovered over his mother's contact name for a long time before he set the phone back down. Not yet. He needed answers first. Real ones. Not the version filtered through Eleanor Whitfield's careful, controlling hands. The next morning, when Maria arrived for her shift, pale, exhausted, bracing for the worst, Alex was waiting for her in the kitchen. No housekeeping schedule, no polite distance between them, just 2 cups of coffee sitting on the counter. One black, one with too much sugar. "I need you to tell me everything," he said quietly. "From the very beginning. And I need you to know, whatever my mother told you, whatever she told me, I think we were both lied to." Maria's hands shook as she wrapped them around the warm mug, the same way she used to 11 years ago. "Alex," she whispered, "there's something about Sophie's birthday you need to know first. Something that changes everything you think you understand about the last 11 years." He set his own cup down slowly. "Tell me." "The truth doesn't ask permission before it arrives. She was born 7 months after I left Ohio," Maria said, her voice trembling but steady, like a bridge holding weight it was never designed for. "Not 8. Not 9. 7. Alex's brow furrowed. "I don't understand." "She was premature, Alex. Almost dangerously early. I spent 11 days in a hospital in San Antonio not knowing if she was going to make it." Maria's eyes glistened, but she pushed forward, like she'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her head and refused to stop now that it was finally happening. "The doctors said the stress caused it. The stress of running, of hiding, of being terrified that your mother would find me and make good on every threat she made." "My mother," Alex repeated, and something dark moved behind his eyes. "What exactly did she threaten you with?" Maria told him. All of it. The folder of money, the 3 visits, the final, chilling promise that she would destroy Maria's reputation so completely that even if she stayed, Alex would eventually be made to believe the worst about her. She told him about the letters she wrote, dozens of them, mailed to his college address, to his parents' house, to anywhere she thought he might see them, and how none of them were ever answered. "I thought you got them," Maria said. "I thought you read every single one and chose to stay silent. For years, Alex, I hated you for that silence. And then I'd remember your face, and I couldn't make the hate stick, and that was almost worse." Alex sat frozen, his knuckles white against the edge of the counter. 11 years of grief, resentment, and hardened ambition were rearranging themselves inside his chest in real time. "I never got a single letter," he said hoarsely. "My mother told me you cheated on me, that you took money and left because being with me wasn't worth the wait. I believed her. God help me, I believed her for 11 years. The kitchen went silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Sophie's cartoons playing from the family room, where she'd been dropped off with a babysitter for the morning, blissfully unaware that her entire world was about to shift beneath her tiny feet. "There's more," Maria said quietly, and something in her tone made Alex's chest tighten further. What else could there possibly be? Maria reached into her bag with shaking hands and pulled out a worn manila envelope, edges soft from years of handling. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a lab report, dated nearly 3 years ago, the header partially faded but still legible. "After Sophie was born, I needed to know for certain," Maria whispered. "Not because I doubted you, because I needed something real to hold on to, something no one could ever take from me or twist into a lie. I paid for a private paternity test using a strand of hair I still had from before. I never told anyone. I never used it for anything. I just needed to know for myself that she was really yours, that some part of what we had was real and permanent, even after everything fell apart." Alex's hands shook as he took the paper from her. Probability of paternity, 99.998%. The room seemed to tilt. 3 years he had spent grieving a relationship he believed had been a lie. 3 years his daughter had existed in the world, growing, laughing, learning to walk and talk and asked curious questions, while he sat in boardrooms across the country completely unaware that she existed at all. 3 years, he said, his voice breaking on the number. "She's been alive for 3 years, and I've never once held her. I've never once known her name until yesterday. I wanted to tell you," Maria said, tears finally spilling freely down her cheeks. "So many times. But every time I tried to find the courage, I remembered your mother's face, and I remembered how much power your family had, and I was terrified, not for me, Alex, but for Sophie. What if they tried to take her from me? What if they decided a Whitfield heir belonged with a Whitfield, and not with the woman they'd already tried once to erase?" Alex stood up, so fast his chair scraped hard against the tile floor. For a moment, Maria flinched, bracing for anger. Instead, He walked straight past her, into the family room, and knelt down in front of the small girl sitting cross-legged on the rug, locket still hanging around her neck, eyes glued to the television. "Sophie," he said softly, his voice cracking in a way it hadn't in 11 years. "Can I sit with you for a minute?" She looked up at him with those wide, curious eyes, his mother's eyes, he realized now, staring back at him from his own daughter's face, and patted the rug beside her without hesitation, the way only a child who has never learned to be afraid of the truth can do. "Okay," she said simply. "But you have to watch the cartoon too. It's the good part." Alex sat down on the floor of his own mansion, in his $3,000 suit, and watched cartoons beside a daughter he had just learned existed, while behind him, Maria stood in the doorway with her hand pressed over her mouth, watching 11 years of heartbreak finally, quietly, begin to heal. But not everyone in that house was going to welcome this reunion. Because upstairs, in a private study overlooking the estate, Eleanor Whitfield had just walked in early for a visit, and she had heard every single word. Some mothers protect their children. Others only protect the family name. Eleanor Whitfield stood frozen at the top of the staircase, one hand gripping the banister so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She had come to drop off paperwork for the quarterly board meeting, expecting an empty house except for staff. Instead, she'd walked straight into the wreckage of a secret she had spent 11 years and a small fortune trying to bury. She had heard everything. The letters, the threats, the paternity test. For a long moment, she simply stood there, composing her face into the same calm, controlled mask she'd worn through decades of business negotiations, hostile takeovers, and family funerals. Then she descended the stairs slowly, deliberately, each step a quiet declaration of war. "Alexander," she said, her voice smooth as glass and twice as sharp. "I think it's time we talked." Alex rose to his feet, lifting Sophie gently onto his hip without thinking, an instinctive gesture that made something in Maria's chest ache with both love and terror. Eleanor's eyes flicked to the child, taking in every detail, the curls, the chin, the eyes, and for just a fraction of a second, something almost human flickered behind her composed expression. But only for a fraction of a second. "You lied to me," Alex said, his voice low and dangerously calm. "For 11 years, you let me believe Maria abandoned me for money. You intercepted her letters. You threatened her. And, because of that lie, I missed the first 3 years of my daughter's life." "I protected this family," Eleanor said, her chin lifting. "You were 23 years old, Alexander, engaged to inherit a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and you were about to throw it all away for a girl with no name, no connections, and no future beyond whatever small life she could offer you." "She offered me love," Alex said. "Something you clearly don't understand the value of." "Love doesn't build empires," Eleanor snapped. "Sacrifice does. I sacrificed my own happiness for this family's legacy, and I expected the same from you." "You didn't sacrifice anything," Maria said quietly, stepping forward for the first time, her voice trembling but firm. "You sacrificed us. My health. My daughter's safety. Alex's chance to know his own child. That's not sacrifice, Mrs. Whitfield. That's cruelty wearing an expensive coat." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, Sophie, completely unaware of the tension crackling through the room, reached out one small hand toward her grandmother, the locket swinging gently from her neck. "Are you the mean lady Mommy talks about in her sleep?" she asked innocently. The room went utterly silent. Eleanor's carefully constructed composure cracked, just slightly, just enough for Alex to see the flicker of something underneath, not quite guilt, but close to it. She looked at the little girl in her son's arms, this small, undeniable proof of the family bloodline she claimed to protect so fiercely, and for the first time in over a decade, she seemed genuinely unsure of what to say. "I did what I believed was necessary," she finally said, quieter now. "I won't apologize for protecting this family's future." "This," Alex said, gesturing between himself, Maria, and Sophie, "is this family's future, whether you accept it or not." He turned to Maria, his expression softening completely, 11 years of hardened distance melting away in real time. I don't expect you to forgive what happened. I don't expect us to just pick up where we left off like nothing happened. But I am not letting either of you walk out of my life again. Not my daughter. And not you. Maria's breath caught. Alex, I don't want your money. I never wanted. I know, he said gently. That's exactly why I trust you with everything I have. Eleanor turned sharply and walked toward the front door without another word, her heels clicking against the marble in a rhythm that sounded almost like retreat. But at the threshold, she paused, her back still turned. You'll regret opening that door again, she said quietly. People like her always leave eventually. She never left, Alex said. You made sure of that. And I intend to spend the rest of my life making up for it. The door closed behind Eleanor with a heavy, final sound. Sophie, blissfully unaware of the storm that had just passed, tugged gently on her father's sleeve. Can we watch the rest of the cartoon now? Alex let out a shaky laugh, the first real laugh he'd allowed himself in years, and pressed a kiss to the top of his daughter's head. Yeah, baby girl. We can watch the rest of the cartoon. But as he sat back down on that living room floor, one arm around his daughter, and his eyes finding Maria's across the room, he knew this wasn't the end of the fight. Eleanor Whitfield did not lose gracefully, and the war for his daughter's future and his family's legacy was only just beginning. Peace is fragile when someone powerful wants it broken. The weeks that followed felt like borrowed time, golden, quiet, almost unreal. Alex cleared his calendar in ways his assistants had never seen before, canceling international calls to attend Sophie's daycare pickup, learning the specific way she liked her grilled cheese cut, diagonal, never straight, and discovering that 3-year-olds ask approximately 400 questions per hour, most of them about why the sky doesn't fall down. Maria moved cautiously through this new reality, still half-braced for the ground to shift beneath her at any moment. Old habits of survival don't disappear just because the danger seems to have passed. She kept her small apartment for weeks even after Alex quietly offered, gently, without pressure, to move them into guest quarters on the estate. It wasn't about the house. It was about proving to herself that this wasn't a fairy tale that would collapse the second she let her guard down. Alex understood. He didn't push. Instead, he showed up every single day, consistently, in the small, unglamorous ways that mattered more than any grand gesture ever could. But peace, in the Whitfield family, was never something that lasted long unchallenged. 3 weeks after the confrontation in the mansion, Alex received a call from his family's longtime attorney, requesting an urgent meeting. He arrived expecting a routine business matter. Instead, he found Eleanor already seated at the head of the conference table, flanked by 2 lawyers he didn't recognize, a thick folder placed neatly in front of her like a loaded weapon. "What is this?" Alex asked, taking a seat across from her. "A formal request," Eleanor said calmly, "for a custody evaluation regarding Sophie Alvarez Whitfield." Alex's stomach turned to ice. "Excuse me? You've known this child exists for 3 weeks," Eleanor continued, sliding the folder across the table. "Her mother has raised her alone, in modest circumstances, with no legal claim to the Whitfield name or estate. As Sophie's grandmother, and given my concerns about the stability of her mother's background, I believe it's in the child's best interest to establish a formal custody arrangement, one that ensures she is raised with appropriate resources, education, and protection befitting her lineage." "You're trying to take my daughter from her mother," Alex said, his voice deadly quiet. "I'm trying to protect my granddaughter," Eleanor corrected coolly. "There's a difference, though I understand why you might not see it that way right now." Alex stood up, so abruptly his chair nearly toppled backward. "You spent 11 years lying to me about her existence, and now, 3 weeks after I finally meet her, you want to drag her mother through a custody battle? Using money, she doesn't have to fight lawyers she can't afford." "I want what's best for this family," Eleanor said, unmoved. "You are not part of this decision," Alex snapped. "You lost that right the moment you decided to erase my daughter from my life before she was even born." He grabbed the folder, tore it cleanly in half, and dropped both pieces onto the table in front of her. "If you pursue this, I will make sure every single person in this company, every investor, every board member, and every journalist who has ever asked about the Whitfield legacy knows exactly what you did. I will not let you weaponize the law against the woman who raised my daughter alone, in poverty, after you personally drove her out of my life. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes flickered, the first genuine crack of uncertainty Alex had seen in her in years. You destroy this family's reputation over a housekeeper, she said quietly. She's not a housekeeper, Alex said, his voice trembling with restrained fury. She's the mother of my child. And I would burn this entire company to the ground before I let you take either of them from me again. He walked out of that boardroom without waiting for a response, hands shaking, heart pounding, already dialing Maria's number before he'd even reached the elevator. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright, mid-laugh at something Sophie had said in the background. The sound of it, normal, safe, unguarded, made his chest tighten painfully. Alex? Everything okay? He closed his eyes, steadying his breath before he spoke. Maria, I need you to listen to me carefully. My mother is trying to file for custody. I need you to trust me when I tell you I am not going to let that happen. But I need to know you're safe right now. Where's Sophie? The silence on the other end of the line stretched just a beat too long. Alex, Maria said slowly, fear creeping into her voice. Sophie was with the sitter today. I just called to check in, and she's not answering. Ice spread through Alex's veins. Maria, where does the sitter live? Near the estate, Maria whispered. Alex, why does that matter? He was already running for his car. Fear moves faster than any luxury car ever could. Alex's hands trembled against the steering wheel as he sped through Austin traffic, weaving between lanes with a recklessness that would have terrified him on any other day. His phone sat propped against the dashboard, Maria's voice coming through the speaker in short, panicked bursts as she frantically dialed the sitter over and over, each call going straight to voicemail. She's never done this before, Maria said, her voice cracking. She always answers. Always. We're going to find her, Alex said, though his own chest felt like it was collapsing inward. Maria, I promise you, we're going to find her. 20 minutes felt like 20 years. When Alex finally screeched to a stop outside the sitter's modest duplex on the edge of town, Maria's car was already parked crookedly in the driveway, door hanging open, engine still running. He sprinted up the front walkway and found Maria standing frozen on the porch, staring at a note taped to the front door. His stomach dropped as he read it over her shoulder. Sophie is safe with family. This was the only way to ensure she receives the life and protection she deserves. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. No signature. But they both knew exactly whose handwriting curled across that paper. She took her, Maria whispered, her whole body beginning to shake. She actually took her. Alex was already dialing his mother's private line, his voice a low, dangerous growl the moment the call connected. Where is my daughter? She's safe, Eleanor said calmly, as though she were discussing a dinner reservation rather than the abduction of a 3-year-old. I simply removed her from a situation I deemed unstable until the custody matter is properly resolved through legal channels. You kidnapped her. I relocated her, temporarily for her own protection, Eleanor corrected. There's a difference, Alexander, and any judge in this state will agree with me, given the mother's financial instability and lack of legal standing. I will call the police right now, Alex said. Go ahead, Eleanor replied, unbothered. By the time they arrive, I'll have already filed emergency custody paperwork citing concerns about the child's environment. Do you really want to drag Maria's name through a very public, very ugly legal battle? Because I promise you, I have the resources to make this last for years, and I have no intention of losing. Alex closed his eyes, forcing himself to think clearly through the fury and fear roaring through his chest. He knew his mother well enough to know that threats and shouting wouldn't move her an inch. She respected only 2 things in this world, power and leverage. So he gave her both. Fine, Alex said, his voice suddenly eerily calm. You want a legal battle? I'll give you one. But understand this, The moment you file that paperwork, I will resign as CEO of this company, effective immediately, and I will make sure every major shareholder knows exactly why. I will tell them my own mother orchestrated a cover-up to hide my daughter's existence for 3 years, then attempted to have her forcibly removed from a stable, loving home the moment the truth came out. I will make sure this story runs in every major business publication in this country before your legal team even finishes drafting the first motion. Silence stretched across the line. You wouldn't, Eleanor said, though her voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. Test me, Alex said. You've spent your entire life protecting this family's image above everything else. I am telling you right now, I will personally dismantle that image, piece by piece, unless my daughter is back in her mother's arms within the hour. Another long silence. Then, quietly, the address is 4471 Cedarwood Lane. She's with my driver. She's perfectly fine, Alexander. I would never actually put her in danger. You already did, Alex said, the moment you took her from the only home she's ever known. He hung up without waiting for a response and turned to Maria, who was already climbing into his car, her hands still trembling but her eyes fierce with a mother's determination. Cedarwood Lane, he said. 15 minutes from here. They made it in 11. When they burst through the front door of the unfamiliar house, they found Sophie sitting on a stranger's couch, tear-streaked but otherwise unharmed, clutching her locket tightly in one small fist. The moment she saw her mother's face, she burst into fresh tears and ran straight into Maria's arms. Mommy, she sobbed, the lady said I had to go with her. I told her I wanted to wait for you, but she wouldn't listen. Maria sank to her knees, holding her daughter so tightly it seemed she might never let go, tears streaming freely down her own face. Alex knelt beside them both, wrapping his arms around his small, fractured, newly formed family, feeling something in his chest that he could only describe as the exact moment his life finally began to make sense. I've got you, he whispered against Sophie's hair. Both of you. I promise I've got you now. But even as relief washed over him, a hard, cold clarity settled in alongside it. His mother had shown him exactly how far she was willing to go. And Alex knew, with absolute certainty, that this would not be the last time she tried. Sometimes protecting your family means burning down the empire that raised you. The following morning, Alex walked into the Whitfield Industries boardroom and, for the first time in 11 years, didn't sit in his usual chair. Instead, he stood at the head of the long mahogany table, 11 senior board members watching him with a mixture of confusion and concern as he set a single folder down in front of him. Not a merger proposal, not a quarterly report, but a personal statement he had stayed up until 4 in the morning writing by hand. Before we begin today's agenda, Alex said, his voice steady despite the storm still churning inside him, there's something I need to share with all of you. Something my mother has spent 11 years trying to hide, and something I refuse to hide any longer. He told them everything. The relationship with Maria in college. The threats Eleanor had made. The intercepted letters. The daughter he hadn't known existed until 3 weeks ago. And finally, the attempted abduction just 24 hours earlier, orchestrated by his own mother in an attempt to seize custody through manipulation and legal intimidation. The room fell into stunned silence. I'm telling you this, Alex continued, not because I owe any of you an explanation for my personal life, but because I believe a company built on secrecy, manipulation, and control at the family's core cannot be trusted to operate with integrity in the business world either. If my own mother was willing to lie to me for 11 years and attempt to kidnap my daughter to maintain image and control, I have to ask all of you, what else has she been willing to hide over the years to protect this family's public image? One of the older board members, a woman named Diane Chun who had worked alongside Eleanor for nearly 2 decades, cleared her throat carefully. Alexander, are you suggesting your mother's conduct extends beyond this personal matter? I'm suggesting, Alex said, that a person capable of what she did to protect an image is a person capable of anything, and I think this board deserves the opportunity to decide, with full transparency, whether Eleanor Whitfield still belongs in a position of influence over this company's future. By the end of that meeting, after nearly 3 hours of tense discussion, the board voted, not unanimously but decisively, to remove Eleanor Whitfield from her advisory position on the company's executive council, citing concerns about judgment, ethics, and conduct unbecoming of a leadership role. When Alex called to inform her personally, her voice on the other end of the line was cold, clipped, and utterly devoid of the composed authority she'd carried her entire life. "You destroyed everything I built," she said quietly.
No, Alex replied.
"You destroyed it yourself. 11 years ago, the moment you decided a bloodline mattered more than a person's happiness. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences." There was a long pause on the line. "She has your father's stubbornness," Eleanor finally said, her voice softer than Alex had heard it in years. "Sophie. She has his stubbornness, and your mother's eyes. I saw at the moment she looked at me." Alex closed his eyes, surprised by the sudden ache of something almost like sympathy threading through his anger. "You could have known her," he said quietly. "You could still know her if you're willing to actually change. But it starts with an apology. To me, and especially to Maria. Not a strategic apology. A real one." The line went silent again, longer this time. "I need time," Eleanor finally said. "Take it," Alex replied. "But don't take too long. Sophie won't stay 3 years old forever, and neither of us are getting any younger." He hung up the phone and sat alone in his office for a long moment, staring out at the Austin skyline, feeling the strange, heavy mixture of grief and relief that comes with finally setting down a weight you didn't even realize you'd been carrying your entire adult life. Then he picked up his phone again and called Maria. "Hey," he said softly when she answered. "How's our girl?" "Currently trying to convince me that ice cream counts as a vegetable," Maria said, and for the first time in weeks, Alex heard something in her voice that sounded almost like genuine, unguarded happiness. "Save me a bowl," he said. "I'm coming home." Home. The word settled strangely and beautifully in his chest, unfamiliar in the best possible way. A house doesn't become a home until the right people are standing inside it. 6 months passed like a slow, healing exhale. Maria and Sophie moved into the east wing of the Whitfield estate, not because Alex insisted, but because one evening, watching Sophie fall asleep mid-sentence on his shoulder for the 3rd time that week after another exhausting crosstown drive back to their apartment, Maria quietly admitted that maybe it was time to stop being afraid of what accepting help might mean about her strength as a mother. "Accepting help doesn't make you weak," Alex had told her that night, brushing a curl gently away from Sophie's sleeping face. "It just means you finally trust that the ground isn't going to disappear beneath you this time." Slowly, carefully, trust rebuilt itself between them, not the reckless, all-consuming love of two 22-year-olds who thought the world couldn't touch them, but something steadier. Something forged by loss, and shaped by the responsibility of raising a daughter who deserved both of her parents' full presence, not just their good intentions. Sophie thrived in ways that broke and healed Maria's heart simultaneously. She had her father's laugh, loud and full-bodied, and her mother's habit of asking 100 questions before accepting any answer at face value. She learned to swim in the estate's pool with Alex holding her steady beneath the water. She learned her letters, tracing the initial on her locket with a proud, gap-toothed grin, announcing to anyone who would listen that the A stood for Alexander, her daddy, in case they didn't already know. Eleanor's apology, when it finally came, arrived not as a grand gesture, but as a quiet Tuesday afternoon visit. No lawyers, no folders, no agenda beyond a small, hand-wrapped gift for Sophie, and a request to sit on the porch with Maria for 20 minutes. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Eleanor said carefully, watching Sophie chase butterflies across the lawn a short distance away. "I know that's not something I've earned. I'm asking for the chance to earn it slowly, in whatever small ways you'll allow." Maria studied her for a long moment, old wounds and new hope warring quietly behind her eyes. "She likes butterflies," Maria finally said. "And she loves being read to before bed. If you're serious about earning anything, that's where you start. Small. Consistent.
No agendas."
Eleanor nodded, something unfamiliar and vulnerable crossing her composed features. "Small and consistent," she repeated softly. I think I can manage that. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a door cracked open just enough to let a little light through, and sometimes that's exactly where real healing quietly begins. That evening, after Sophie had finally fallen asleep clutching a stuffed elephant nearly as big as she was, Alex found Maria standing on the balcony outside their bedroom, staring out at the stars scattered across the wide Texas sky. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, wrapping his arms gently around her from behind. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," she admitted quietly. 11 years of running teaches you not to trust when things feel this peaceful. Alex pressed a soft kiss to the top of her head. "I understand that fear. I really do. But, Maria, I need you to know, I'm not going anywhere this time. Not tomorrow, not next year, not ever. I lost 11 years I can never get back, and I refuse to lose a single day more." Maria turned in his arms, searching his face in the moonlight, 11 years of grief and love and fear all tangled together behind her eyes. "I still have the locket," she whispered. "The matching one. The one you never got to see." She reached into the collar of her shirt and pulled out a thin gold chain identical to Sophie's, engraved with a matching initial. "I never took it off," she admitted. "Not once. Not even when I hated you. Not even when I was sure I'd never see you again." Alex's throat tightened as he pulled her closer, resting his forehead gently against hers. "Then let's make sure," he murmured, "that neither of us ever has a reason to take it off again. Some promises deserve to be made twice." 1 year to the day after Sophie first held up her locket in that marble hallway, Alex stood in the same spot, staring up the same grand staircase, his heart pounding for an entirely different reason. He'd planned this moment for weeks. Nothing extravagant, nothing performative for cameras or headlines, just the 3 people who mattered most standing together in the place where their story had truly begun. Maria descended the staircase slowly, unaware of what waited at the bottom, dressed simply in a soft yellow sundress, Sophie's small hand tucked into hers, the little girl practically vibrating with excitement over a secret Alex had sworn her to keep for exactly 6 agonizing days. "Daddy said we're doing something important today," Sophie announced proudly the moment she reached the bottom step, clearly unable to contain herself a second longer. Maria laughed, glancing curiously between her daughter's barely contained excitement and Alex's nervous, uncharacteristically fidgety expression. "What's going on?" she asked. Alex knelt down, not in front of Maria, but in front of Sophie first, taking her small hands gently in his. "Sophie, baby girl, I need to ask you something very important," he said seriously, and Sophie straightened up immediately, matching his solemn tone with a fierce concentration only a 4-year-old attempting to be extremely grown-up can muster. "Is it okay with you if I ask your mommy to marry me?" Sophie's serious expression cracked instantly into a delighted, gap-toothed grin.
Yes.
"Yes, yes, yes," she squealed, bouncing on her toes. "Then we can all match." Alex laughed, rising to his feet and turning to Maria, who stood frozen at the bottom of the staircase, one hand pressed against her chest, tears already welling in her eyes. "Maria Alvarez," Alex said, his voice thick with emotion as he lowered himself onto one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. 11 years ago, I made you a promise in a parking lot that I couldn't keep, through no fault of either of us. I've spent every day since then wishing I'd fought harder, searched longer, trusted less, and questioned more. I can't give you back those 11 years. But I can promise you every single day from this moment forward, you are the bravest, strongest, most incredible person I have ever known, and I am so deeply grateful that our daughter's curiosity brought you back into my life. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that I will never, ever let either of you go again?" Maria's tears spilled over freely as she nodded, unable to speak for a long moment, before finally choking out a soft, joyful yes. Alex slid the ring onto her trembling finger and rose to pull her into his arms, Sophie immediately wrapping herself around both of their legs, giggling with pure, uncomplicated happiness. From the top of the staircase, unnoticed until that moment, Eleanor Whitfield stood watching quietly, dabbing carefully at her own eyes with a handkerchief, a small, genuine smile finally breaking across features that had spent decades guarding against exactly this kind of unguarded emotion. Some walls take longer to come down than others. But even the tallest ones eventually do, brick by brick, apology by apology, small Tuesday visit by small Tuesday visit. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the Texas hills, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and gold, the newly engaged family sat together on the back lawn, Sophie proudly showing off her matching locket to anyone who would listen, insisting loudly that she had been the one to bring her whole family together, all by myself, with just my necklace. She wasn't entirely wrong. Every ending is really just a new beginning wearing a different name. 3 years later, the Whitfield estate looked different in the best possible way. The marble hallways that once echoed with cold, careful silence now regularly rang out with the sound of running feet, mismatched giggles, and the occasional crash of a dropped toy. Sophie, now 7, had grown into a confident, curious, unstoppable force of nature, still fiercely proud of the fact that she had, in her own words, found my whole family with just one necklace. She had a little brother now, too, Daniel, 18 months old, with Alex's stubborn chin and Maria's calm, patient eyes, currently attempting to eat a fistful of grass on the back lawn while his older sister chased after him, shrieking with laughter. Eleanor Whitfield sat on the porch that afternoon, an older, softer version of the woman who had once tried to erase an entire family before it even had the chance to exist. She had kept her promise, small, consistent, no agendas, showing up every single week for 3 years, reading Sophie bedtime stories, teaching Daniel to blow gentle bubbles in his bathwater, slowly, imperfectly, earning back a place in her grandchildren's lives that she had once nearly destroyed forever. "Grandma Eleanor," Sophie announced one afternoon, plopping down beside her on the porch swing with a particular seriousness only children seem capable of summoning out of nowhere, "I've decided something important." "Oh," Eleanor asked, amused. "And what have you decided, little one?" "I'm going to give Daniel my old baby locket someday," Sophie said thoughtfully, fingering the newer, larger version now hanging around her own neck, a gift from her father on her 7th birthday, engraved with both her initial and her brother's. Because families are supposed to pass important things down, even the accidental important things. Eleanor's eyes glistened slightly as she pulled her granddaughter close. "That," she said softly, "might be the wisest thing anyone in this family has said in a very long time." Inside the house, Alex watched the scene through the kitchen window, one arm wrapped around Maria's waist as she leaned back against his chest, both of them content simply to witness the quiet, ordinary miracle of a family that had almost never been allowed to exist. "Do you ever think about how different things would have been," Maria asked softly, "if Sophie hadn't wandered into that hallway that day?" Alex pressed a slow kiss to the top of her head, watching their daughter laugh in the golden afternoon light outside. "Every single day," he admitted, "but I try not to dwell on it too long. Because the truth is, love has a strange, stubborn way of finding its way home, even when the whole world seems determined to keep it apart. It just sometimes needs a little help." A locket, a curious toddler. 11 years of unanswered letters that never quite managed to erase the truth completely. Maria turned in his arms, smiling up at him with the same soft, unguarded love she'd carried since she was 22 years old, standing in a parking lot, believing, despite everything the world would later try to convince her otherwise, that some promises really are worth keeping. "I love you," she said simply. "Both versions of you. The boy in that parking lot, and the man who fought so hard to bring us home." "I love you too," Alex whispered back. "Both versions of you. And I promise you, Maria, for the rest of our lives, no one is ever taking either of you away from me again." Outside, Sophie's laughter rang out across the lawn, bright and fearless and utterly unaware of just how much courage it had taken from every single person in that family to build the safe, happy life she now got to simply enjoy without a second thought. Because sometimes the biggest, most life-changing truths in the world don't arrive with fireworks or dramatic announcements. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in the small, trusting hands of a 3-year-old girl, holding up a locket and asking one simple, innocent question that changes absolutely everything. If this story touched something in you tonight, I want you to remember this. The truth always finds its way home, even when it takes years, even when the whole world seems determined to bury it. Never underestimate the power of honesty, and never stop fighting for the people you love, no matter how long the road back to them might be. If you felt this story in your heart, please hit that like button. It truly helps this channel more than you know. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, because there are so many more waiting to be told. And if someone in your life needs a reminder tonight that love and truth are always worth fighting for, please share this with them. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I'll see you in the next story.